Hello. In this week's Parsha, next week's Parsha, Tazria and Torah, the Torah deals with some very obscure matters of ritual purity, things that happen to a person's body, to the skin, things that can happen to garments and to the house. And in fact, they're so obscure that even our sages, Chazal, opined that some of them, those that happened to the house, actually never happened. But the Torah gives so much space to these issues that there must be some importance, some deeper meanings attached to them. And in fact, there are not a few midrashim and attempts at homiletical expositions to try and get some wider message out to us from these laws. One of the strangest ones, and one which is so bizarre, one could say, that few people have attempted to interpret it, is found in the Gemara in Baba Metzia concerning one of the forms of impurity, a certain scab that appears on the skin. And the ruling is that when this scab, which is called sapachat, appears on the skin, then it should be sealed by the kohen, by the priest, and examined later. And the sign of whether this is going to be an impurity or not is the appearance of a white hair within that scab. Now, what happens if there was a white hair on the skin before the scab appeared? According to the story in the Gemara and the Talmud, this was a dispute that broke out, a disagreement, let us say better, between HaKadosh Baruch Hu, between God Himself, and the Methifta Damala, the yeshiva, the higher yeshiva, the yeshiva up there in heaven. They disagreed. God said that the man is pure. If the hair had been there before, the white hair had been there before the scab appeared, then when the Kohen opens the wound and sees the white hair there, the man is still pure. Whereas the Methifta, the Rekia, the celestial yeshiva, claimed that the person is impure. And in order to resolve this disagreement, they decided that they would call on a certain expert who was not yet in the celestial yeshiva because he was still alive here on earth, Rabbi Nachmani, and he was then involved in a whole other story, which I can't go into here, running away from the Persian authorities. And he was lured into giving up the ghost, as they say, and went up to the heavenly academy, and he pronounced that it was pure. And that resolved the issue. The issue between the Lord Almighty and the celestial yeshiva was resolved because the human expert, Rabbi Nachmani, gave his authoritative opinion that it's pure. What does this mean? Well, one of the interpretations takes this story together, puts it with another very famous story, much more famous actually, and connected also to sort of obscure laws on ritual purity, Tanur Shel Achinai, where there was a dispute in the terrestrial yeshiva between two scholars, and one of the Rabbi Elazar claimed that he was so sure that he was right that there would be miracles made to indicate that heaven was on his side. And he called upon one miracle after another, and these miracles happened. It didn't help. Rabbi Yeshua got up on his feet and said, Lo b'shamayim hi. We don't decide these things because of divine intervention or what looks to be a miracle. We have been given the authority to rule on these matters. And in fact, the law was decided according to the majority opinion, according to Rabbi Yeshua. Well, what does this mean? Well, it means that, and this is now a very important, very wide-ranging lesson for all of us in all matters, that even though the code, the Torah, is divine, it was given over for interpretation and implementation, because, as we all know, interpreting the law is a step towards the application of it in practice. It was given over to humans, but not to every human, but to a select group of people who are authorized, who are qualified and authorized to take these decisions. And in fact, there's more than one way to look at this particular resolution. Some look at it as almost a prefiguration of pre-modern theory, where the author's opinion is no more authoritative than that of any interpreter. And so, even though the Torah is divine, the divine opinion, as expressed in the disagreement in the heavenly academy, is no more authoritative than that of the human interpreters. But that's the purely level of pure literary theory, which I don't think will go too far in this issue. What seems more to lie behind this is the opinion of one of the great Jewish philosophers of the end of the Middle Ages, Chasdai Kreskas, who, following upon his the Ran, who was his teacher, who was one of the first to give this midrashic interpretation of the story, said that the real issue here is a unity of the Jewish people, that the need for a terrestrial, worldly body, a court, or authoritative legal institution to make a binding judgment, and one which is can stand up to anything, including miracles made by someone who opposes it, is a necessary institution to prevent factionalization. That not every leader will say, "Well, I'm going to, do things my way and take my people with me, and we'll go off and do things according to my ruling." This is extremely important, but it also opens up more questions. All answers seem to lead to more questions. Maybe not so much in Kreskas' time, but certainly in our own time, we have very serious issues, which I can just maybe outline. I can't begin to solve them, on just who is authorized and what are the boundaries. What I mean is the following: that in our contemporary situation, certainly in Israel, but I think in many communities, most communities elsewhere, there are halakhically legitimate, there's more than one halakhically legitimate path. Everyone seems to recognize the Sephardi and Ashkenazi rulings and customs, and almost any legal ruling that's given these days, the person will say, well, Ashkenazim do this and Sephardim do that. There are Misnagdim and Hasidim. There's Chabad, who seems to have a different way of doing everything, than do anything the way the rest of us. And yet we all seem to think that, all of us, what we call Torah Judaism, seem to think that this is within the bounds of legitimacy, whereas Reform Judaism is outside the bounds. And while this sort of seems to be intuitive and consensual within a certain group, which is probably not too strictly defined, the questions, the problems are many. I want to just go back to say that the Jewish tradition has made it clear that in order to give even more authority to the rabbinic interpretations, that the interpretations are no less come from Sinai, just like the Torah itself. Maimonides opens his commentary in the Mishnah by saying, and I'll read a trifle in Arabic, in Kulla Sharia, Anzala Allah ala Moshe Rabbeinu, innaha innama unzilat alahi ma'a tafsiriha. Every Sharia, the Torah being a Sharia, which God, or every mitzvah, which God brought down to Moses, was brought down together with its tafsir, with its interpretation. And in fact, the Rambam goes on and speaks of three different types of interpretation. There's tafsir, there's ta'wil, and there's tadammon dhalik al-nas, and these are different types of interpretation. So the Torah, according to Maimonides, or the mitzvot, was at Sinai with three levels of interpretation. They're all authoritative. But who was authorized to pronounce these interpretations as authoritative? The divine author has passed over the power of authorization to the sages of Israel, to the legal institutions, but these are not sharply defined institutions or individuals in our own age, maybe not at any age, and so we have sort of the mechanisms for a unified binding code, but the mechanisms are sketchy, and the work needs to be done to get things in place and maybe get the system to work as it's supposed to is a very heavy task, and let's hope that we'll be rightly guided. Thank you very much, and Shabbat Shalom.